Welcome to the MFA Thesis Readings and Thesis Defense. This is Alan Soldovsky, Director of the MFA Program in Creative Writing. I'm coming to you from the virtual MFA Thesis Studio in downtown San Jose. For the next 90 minutes or so, MFA candidates have completed or are completing their MFA degrees in December 2019, May 2020, or August 2020 will read a brief excerpt from their thesis project. For the final segment of the program, faculty and audience members will be invited to ask these candidates briefly some really hard questions about their work. And then we'll finish with a big round of applause for all the MFA candidates who have graduated or are about to graduate from San Jose State. Thank you for all joining us. The first candidate to read today is Talia Audrey, who is a nonfiction writer. We'll play a pre-recorded introduction from her thesis director, Kathy Miller, who is sheltering in place near Manchester, England.
Today I'd like to introduce to you Talia Audrey. Talia, like Eli Hansen, is a member of the Flock. Those are my nonfiction students in the graduate program. And she came to us from New England, where she was an accomplished journalist and bookseller. And she has worked with me in many different roles throughout her graduate career. She was my assistant at the Center for Literary Arts, and she worked with me on press releases and event planning to bring a host of fabulous authors from around the world to San Jose. She also worked with me on Read 151 as a nonfiction editor and as our chief copy editor. And she did a terrific job for us. Also, for that same edition, she wrote an engaging profile of T.C. Boyle. I think she had a little too much fun writing it, but that's okay. And today she is going to read from her thesis, which is a memoir called Motion Sickness. And it's her story as a vulnerable young teenage girl who suddenly finds herself with some very adult problems. Please welcome Talia Audrey.
Hello. Hi. Can y'all hear me okay? Yeah, great. So I just want to start and say thank you to all my colleagues and my friends who have helped me through countless drafts and revisions of this manuscript, most especially Professors Kathleen Miller, Ryan Scannell, and Sam Witt. I couldn't have imagined the end of my MFA culminating in a Zoom meeting, but I'm honored to be here with you all today and be in a room with people I love and admire. So I'll be reading a few excerpts from my memoir, I Am the Same Age Now. The excerpts are from the chapter If They Knew. This book chronicles my relationship with my friend's married father when I was 15 and he was 32. If they knew. Ron's words swam in my head as I came to after the procedure. Walk in, walk out. I seemed to be in a room with fuzzy, cloud-like shapes. I tried opening one eye, then the other. My lids were sticky. I blinked again. The fuzzy clouds were in fact hospital beds. I was in a convalescence room with what seemed like a dozen other girls, all young, propped up in their beds, drinking from paper cups. A nurse came and handed me my own paper cup. Orange juice, she said, smiling, helps with your blood sugar. She handed me a tiny packet of saltines. I opened them gingerly, breaking a cracker in half and nibbling before sipping the juice. Mistake, I thought, and to this day, I don't know where I aimed when I turned over the side of the bed and vomited. Once, Carrie caught Ron with his hand on my ass when she was walking downstairs. There was the slight creak in the third stair, and Ron moved his hand quickly, but it was too late. She had seen it. I remember hurrying upstairs when she came down, sensing that this was a conversation I was to have no part in. I bolted up the stairs and slipped into Britt's room, where I'd attempt seamless conversation and sarcasm as Britt, no doubt, put more earrings in her ears or slicked her hair back into a gelled bun. Just before closing the door, I heard, "What the fuck is the matter with you?" During the procedure, the memories go like this. I am on my back in a hospital bed. My legs are in stirrups. I picture my legs in stirrups, but in reality, my feet must have been in stirrups, spreading my legs into a V. I see a man with a blue face mask. He has tan skin and dark eyes. He speaks to me, but I have trouble understanding his accent. He is speaking English. His words seem to balloon out of his mouth like a cartoon character. The doctor. I'm not sure if he was a doctor or a nurse or what title was necessary in order to perform medical abortions in a Planned Parenthood in 2003. Calls me sweetheart, or maybe it's honey. They medicate me so I am calm and partially sedated. I believe this was done intravenously, but it could also have been a pill. I don't know how I got from the waiting room where I changed into my paper gown into the exam room. When the nurse came to get me, my heart fluttered and rattled like a caged bird. My stomach roiled and churned. Before this, the last time I felt that nauseated was in the first grade, when my stepmother had to rub my back in soothing circles as I wept. 10 years later, I cry again out of frustration. No one rubs my back. I remember my hysteria, my sobs, my pleas for someone to retrieve Ron from the waiting room. He's allowed entry into my room and must have sat with me a minute. I had a clarity of mind even then, even at 16, of where my threshold was. "You're gonna need to give me something before I go in," I said. "You'll be partially sedated in the procedure," came the reply. "No, I need something before I go in," I repeated. I had the feeling this was a big ask, or at least slightly unprecedented. The nurse gives me a pill. This is most likely diazepam before the procedure. I'm in the exam room, legs up, staring wildly around the room. I meet nurses' eyes and doctors. My head feels heavy from my neck and lobes around. I thought I must have resembled a cow in labor, fidgety, wide-eyed, swollen, heaving. In reality, the mystery pill and the conscious sedation flattened my body on the bed. The nurses talk me through the procedure. "Here we go. You may feel slight pressure and cramping. You're okay." I watch as the doctor moves a suction cup attached to an electric pump between my legs. It's fitting this procedure is called a vacuum aspiration. I'm left with nothing afterwards. My womb is vacant and hollow. I suspect there will be a trade-off for emptying my uterus, a penance to remove a part of my body, a payment due. The question comes, "What are you doing after this, honey?" This is how I imagine the question is asked, as all I can recall is my slurred speech, my cotton mouth, and one word, pancakes, before I descend into darkness. We hit a Burger King drive-thru on the way home. Ron said it was too late in the day for pancakes. I wasn't certain I could keep anything down. The period that followed was as blurry as the meds they had me on. That fall, I had been hired as a bookseller at Barnes & Noble. I had only just started training. Ron and I made it home Saturday evening. I went in for my shift at 10 a.m. Sunday morning. Walk in, walk out. For a while, it seemed I'd avoided grief. I gave myself daily affirmations. You did what you had to do. You couldn't have his baby. Babies are easy to come by. There will be another. You know, I wish we could keep it, Ron had said in the car on the way to the clinic. He had placed his hand on my belly. We drove back to our brick confines as we had so many times before. He back to his wife and kids, me back to my room with my twin bed. The room where I'd stand by the window in the afternoon and watch for his van. The apartment I was almost never in until after that day. After that day, I couldn't get out of bed. My mother would open the door, one eyebrow raised as she looked down at me wrapped in the comforter. You gonna get out of bed today, Tally? Try something new? I just need to sleep more, I'd say. I'll walk to school. Parenting requires persistence, and my mother didn't have time for that. She had shit to do, she told me. She couldn't just stay in bed all day. I never made it to school those days. I started taking long showers in the mornings and again in the evenings. I was never clean enough. I ran the tap hot so my skin was fleshy and red when I finished. My hair dried and frizzed from overwashing. I pulled long strands out in homeroom and clumped them into dead hairballs. When I was pregnant, my senses heightened as if I had gained a new superpower. I always had the ability to read a room. Losing the pregnancy was a flattening I was unprepared for, something akin to dreaming of running in sand. I had lost the better part of myself, the part that had attuned to life's patterns and my own powers of perception. I had lost the nausea I'd felt each morning, the cue to pay attention. I wasn't alone. I had lost the need to nurture and protect my body. It had stretched and accommodated and just as quickly rearranged itself back.
Next candidate to read will be Daniel Balone, a fiction writer. Seeing him reading from his thesis, which is a novel, is his director, Nick Taylor. You're on, Nick.
Hi, thanks everyone for coming out this afternoon. There are 80 of us here, so I feel privileged to be part of this group, and especially excited to introduce you to Daniel's novel, Criminal Underground. I've never worked on a thesis committee before that included an entomologist, but this one did. Daniel works in this novel with deep knowledge of insect life. And I don't want to spoil anything by giving away, any of the tricks that he uses here, but it is a wildly exciting novel aimed for young adults about about a criminal syndicate that is much more than it appears to be, in a way that I've never encountered in literature before. So I hope you guys enjoy it. And Daniel, it was a pleasure to work with you on this book. And on behalf of your entire committee, congratulations. And we look forward to seeing this in print before long. Take it away.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate all the support that I've gotten from the MFA program, and specifically from Professor Taylor and Professor Sams and Dr. Honda. And I'd also like to give a shout out to Professor Sublett, who teaches screenwriting, and he really helped me break down the process so that I could make this happen. So I'm going to read an excerpt, but you need to know a few things first for it to make sense for you. So the first thing you need to know, it's 1905 and we're in New York. The next thing you need to know is that, and Professor Taylor alluded to this, that there are giant talking bugs that live underneath New York City, but when they go out around people, they're in costume, okay? So they can kind of blend in. So our protagonist, Roger, who's a young con man, and his friends, the detective Jim, the entomology professor, Dr. Reel, and Humbug, who's like a giant mantis, okay? They've been taken into custody by soldiers of the Ermite Queen. So imagine a giant termite. They have really big heads and exoskeletons, that kind of thing. These soldiers are dressed up as an elderly woman, a nanny, a newsboy, and an affluent gentleman. Okay, so let's get into it. We're gonna go into the underground here. They were led to the basement of an abandoned candy store. A worn old man sat behind the counter reading a newspaper. He walked up to the nanny, and the two of them danced around each other with a series of nods, bows, and synchronized heel clicks. "Why are they dancing?" Roger said. "Oh, that dance is the friendly greeting of the lacewings," Humbug said. "It's used as a password." The nanny and the old man clapped 3 times and waved their arms in the air. It is somewhat adapted due to their human costumes. "Bees do the same thing," Professor Reel said. "It's how they map out the flowers they pollinate." The two spun on their heels and bowed to each other one more time. The nanny parked her stroller behind the counter and lifted a swaddled bundle out of it. She pulled off the blankets to reveal a tangle of gelatinous pink tubes ending in a long, sharp spike. A green liquid dripped from the tip, which landed on the ground and caused acrid smoke to rise. It looked like one of Professor Reel's booby traps. The nanny pointed it at the 4 of them like a rifle. Reel put his hands up. The shopkeep opened a hatch in the floor, and the nanny gestured with the nematocyst that they should climb down. They took a long spiral staircase that ended at a landing suspended in total darkness. Roger heard a hum, and the whole structure, which creaked and wobbled like it was made of slipshod scaffolding, vibrated. Hands pushed him down additional steps to another spiral staircase made of metal, carried by a brace of beetles the size of ponies. They descended toward the glow of the lightning bug thunderclouds in the underground, to the top of the tallest stalagmite hive tower. In the incandescence of the red and white and black-purple light, the exoskeletons of streams of underdwellers walking about their business below shimmered like oil. The air was thick with the buzz of ermite wings, flapping to pump air in and out of the skyscraper-sized hive structure. More than before, the underground had a bump and a jive, an agitation Roger had felt when his fellow New Yorkers walked so fast as to almost be jogging, moving as a shoulder-to-shoulder crowd before and after working hours. "Feels like there's a fire about to start," Jim said. "It's the nuptial flight," Humbug said. "The security measures and the amplified command stream traffic makes the air positively crackle." The Ermite soldiers led them to one of several tunnel entrances that crowned the top of the hive structure. Roger noticed that the structure itself was composed of rocks, but also pieces of furniture or carriages with occasional bricks and wooden beams. The pieces held together with a hard, transparent substance that glowed a slight cyan in the black-purple light. The granny, the nanny, the newsboy, and the nabob bent over, and Ermite foot soldiers unfolded from within their costumes and pushed Roger, the professor, Jim, and Humbug into the tunnel entrance, which seemed to exhale warm, moist air. The light shifted. The lightning bug glow refracted through transparent patches of the hive structure wall, but the ceiling of the tunnel was smeared with a glowing green algae that allowed Roger to make out silhouettes, but not much else. They were pushed into a jog that stopped every time they encountered a different train of Ermites. The two in front of each train would walk up to each other and rub their faces together, and then move on. The jogs were rapid, moving downhill at a steeper and steeper rate, and the stops were sudden. Roger could hear the professor panting. "Are you okay, Professor?" Jim asked at one of their stops. Before he could get an answer, they were running again. "Here," Humbug said. He picked up the professor like a baby. "Thank you." They ran for a while longer until the tunnel ended at a steep drop-off. Streaks of the green algae stretched down, the same warm air breathed up from the depths. Their Ermite captors pitched each of them up on their backs, then pressed them belly down into their exoskeletons with their middle legs. The Ermites then climbed face down on the wall of the drop-off. Roger reached for something to hold, but the Ermites' bodies were hard and smooth, made up of segmented plates that folded into each other. He hugged the big round body and tried not to look down to the green glow below. His curiosity outgrew his vertigo after a few minutes of their descent. The green algae light shimmered on a surface that Roger realized was a vast lake. The glowing algae grew more densely around the water and under it, allowing him to make out more than just silhouettes. As they climbed closer, he saw ermites climbing out of the water and shaking themselves dry. These ones looked different from the foot soldiers, with smaller heads and broader backs. One of them passed by him and was covered in smaller ermites. I bet this is right up your alley, Professor, Jim said. I will be fascinated once I am done being nauseated, the professor said. This is why I didn't go into geology. Rocks were my first love, but I just can't stand heights. They came to the shore of the lake, which radiated with the green algae light and the warm, tangy air. Fascinating, Reel said. Oh, feeling better already, Jim asked. Well, the command stream pheromones are dispersed in a concentrated form into the water, which evaporates and carries through the air system of the hive structure and beyond. Makes it defensible too, Jim said. The water looks deep enough to stop projectiles. I didn't catch any of that, Roger said. All I know is it smells like trash funk. Roger turned to Humbug. We're going in that glowing green funk water, aren't we? Of course, Humbug replied. Without a warning to hold their breath, their ermite captors walked into the water. Humbug clicked and chirped to his captor, and it let him slip out of his costume. Once they were in the water, the awkward, ungainly forms of the ermite foot soldiers moved with a kind of grace Roger hadn't expected. Their legs rippled through the water, pushing them deeper into the underwater cavern where the light glowed brighter and brighter. They crested a ridge, and beneath them, every surface was covered in ermite eggs and larvae. The broad-backed nanny ermites swung among them, bringing clumps of round fungus bodies. The larvae flailed around each ball of fungus, their clear bodies showing every bite they took, along with their pumping, pulsing internal organs. They swam past the nursery, and Roger felt like his lungs were turning inside out. He looked around at the others. Jim and the professor's eyes were bulging. Ridges on the side of Humbug's abdomen fanned open and closed in a steady breathing rhythm. The algae's glow lit up the emerald and violet patterns on his exoskeleton, even brighter than before. They swam to a dome of rock at the bottom of the cavern. Roger's vision grew hazy and his head light as his heart hammered his chest. He closed his eyes for just a moment, squeezing his mouth closed as his ears pressed and popped. He felt his captor swimming down and then up into open air. Roger gasped and opened his eyes. He was thrown on a rocky slope that rose from the water. His captor clicked and chirped. When Roger did nothing, the ermite rasped, "You may now beg." Roger lifted his eyes and beheld the ermite queen.
Strange and disturbing. Thank you, Daniel. The next candidate to read is Julia Dunn. Julia is a nonfiction writer. She will be introduced by her thesis director, Tom Moriarty. Tom?
Yes, thank you, Alan. And thank you, everybody, for coming to join us today on Zoom. It is my real pleasure to introduce Julia to all of you. She is a December 2019 graduate, so she is all completely signed, sealed, and delivered and graduated, and she specialized in nonfiction. Since graduating in December, Julia has continued working as a newsletter coordinator for the World Languages and Literatures Department here at San Jose State. And she also recently accepted a full-time role with our reports are currently virtual Dean's Office, where she's managing recruitment that's focused on outreach and communications for the college. Writing-wise, Julia has been revisiting a number of poems that she wrote in our MFA program that focus on issues of control, what it means to have control, to lose control, and to negotiate it with others and with ourselves. She says that she hopes to extend and expand those poems into a longer series or a chapbook that speaks to our new COVID-19 informed lifestyle. Julia's thesis, which she'll be reading from today, was a memoir of growing up, and it was titled The Hill. And everybody, Julia Dunn.
Thank you, Tom. I also want to thank my thesis committee members, Professor Taylor and Professor Norris, for believing in this story. I want to thank my friends for joining us today, and family as well, especially my mom, who knows this story better than anyone. I think above anything, this is a story of escaping isolation, but more importantly, recreating your own reality. You can't go to church. You have to buy propane. Daddy waited for Mama's response. The Twin Towers had just gone down on September 11th, 2001. I was in first grade. We had heard the news on the radio driving through Occidental and saw the images only on newspaper covers. We had no cable in the woods. Daddy insisted we stock up on supplies like survivalists. Mama repeated she just wanted to go to church and pray. He wouldn't allow it. A few days after the tragedy, Mama bought planter boxes and flower bulbs, tulips, hyacinths, daffodils, and drove them to Mrs. Rich's class. She gave a bulb to every child in my class. We nestled them into pots and placed them around our classroom on windowsills. We formed rows of bulbs in the garden beds by the playground, impatient for the blooms that would emerge after a little bit of water and time. Mama taught us a trick. She planted a second layer of bulbs above the first layer, so blossoms on top would make way for new blossoms later. There's goodness in layers, she'd say. In maximum evil, do maximum good. The other kids and I worked hard to finish planting. We scraped dirt from our fingernails and enjoyed apple juice popsicles as an afternoon treat. We didn't understand what had happened 2 days ago in New York. We barely understood how flower bulbs worked. Eventually, the school courtyard was a rainbow of crimson, yellow, and purple blooms, all thanks to Mama's last-minute idea. Now, when I think of 9/11, I think of flowers. In 1989, my parents bought 17 acres of undeveloped land in Forestville, California, a tiny bohemian area in the Russian River Valley. Using a library book about how to build a house, Daddy built a cluster of 120-square-foot cabins on the top of a hill. In December 1995, these woods became my first home. I learned later that Daddy had built the cabins this small on purpose, to avoid being required by the county to register a house in our name. According to building codes, you didn't need a permit to build a structure of that size, and you could have up to 6 of those units. Daddy was careful to stay under the limits. At 121 square feet, we could have been in trouble. We had no address on the road. The first cabin had a main room, a loft, and an underground basement you had to use a ladder to access. There was another ladder up to the loft, a space only large enough for the queen-sized bed where we all slept. I would sleep at the end of the bed, well poised to roll off the edge of the loft at any time. I worried I might fall, so I curled my body like a sleeping cat. On the outside of the cabin, Daddy painted an orchid with curvy petals and a Kelly green stem that spanned the entire height of the building. It popped against the white paint covering the rest of the cabin. The orchid seemed to mark our territory, to assert our uniqueness in a region already marked by eccentricity. Our other cabins were only big enough to serve 1 or 2 purposes each. The kitchen held only a table, a camping stove, and kerosene lamps. Another cabin contained nothing but a deep white basin that we'd use for washing dishes and ourselves, with rainwater that Daddy filtered by hand using a pump. In front of that cabin was a hole in the ground filled with ice, our refrigerator. At first, our toilet was a Tupperware container that Mama or Daddy would empty into the soil as needed. We'd pile bags of trash in the back of Mama's car and drive it to the landfill. The dump, Daddy called it. But a few years after I was born, Daddy built another cabin to hold a Sunmar composting toilet and nothing else. There was no sink, no plumbing. The Sunmar was a clunky sort of throne with a plastic seat that emptied into a wide bin of peat moss. To flush, you had to crank a handle on the side of the Sunmar, 3 or 4 clockwise turns. This would shuffle the moss and bathroom matter into a compost that would have to be shoveled out of the unit and deposited at the side of the hill every few weeks. For this reason, the Sunmar became burdensome, a source of contention between Daddy and Mama. Whose turn was it to empty the Sunmar? It was one of those things that made everything else feel just a little bit more difficult as a result. Next to the composting toilet was a copy of Harold and the Purple Crayon by Crockett Johnson. I started to associate using the Sunmar with flipping through those yellowing pages and watching Harold literally draw his own reality. If he needed something he didn't have, all he had to do was sketch it and he could use it, no problem. The book starts with Harold going for a walk in the moonlight, but he doesn't actually have a moon, so he draws one. He seemed like a perfect example of resourcefulness, the type of child I wanted to be. Sometimes I was too scared to walk alone to the Sunmar after dark. What if I fell into the ravine? What if a skunk sprayed me? These possibilities seemed to swirl into a greater anxiety of being unsupervised in the emptiness of night. But thanks to Harold, the idea of manifesting a real toilet seemed more possible. Our cabins were isolated from any neighbors, and Daddy preferred this. He had single-handedly dug the trail we'd use to reach the cabins from the road, but it was narrow and we had to walk single file. Hiking up that trail seemed to mean leaving the rest of the world behind. Green Valley Road was quiet to begin with, but if Daddy heard a car approaching in the distance, especially at night, he'd cup his hands around his ears to confirm it. Then, in a hushed and serious tone, he'd say, "Freeze." Mama and I had to stay perfectly still and silent. We hunkered low to the ground as headlights from the road cast moving shadows through the trees. When Daddy bought a generator and extension cord, we could watch videos in the basement. He had me watch The Sound of Music with him many times, each time exclaiming over the unspoiled landscape of Austria. The Sound of Music never struck me as a kid's movie. I didn't understand some parts of the story, but there was one scene I hated most. The one where Nazis are searching for the Von Trapp family, all of whom are frozen perfectly still behind tombstones in the cemetery of the Abbey. "Fast forward, Daddy, this part scares me," I would say as we watched. He never seemed to hear my request. There was an unspoken terror to Daddy's freezing routine that would become more apparent over time, especially for Mama. But as a child, I took it as a challenge and I kept the questions to myself. Could I stay perfectly still? What would happen if somebody saw us from the road? Should we have hid behind something like the Von Trapp family had? Were we doing bad things? If we were, how long until we'd be exposed? When the coast was clear, Daddy let us unfreeze and keep walking. Still, for some reason, we kept silent. I'm going to skip forward a few chapters where at this point my mom and I have left the hill. This section is called "A Whole Car Just for Pizza." In 2003, I stepped out of Mama's car onto a driveway in front of a house in Santa Rosa. A chunky stone archway framed a clean doorstep. A tidy lawn sported a single birch tree and a wooden post with a metal box on top. Mama ushered me towards the white door. "What's that for?" I asked, pointing to a button next to it. "That's a doorbell, Julia. People ring it when they visit, and that's how we'll know they're here." I must have pressed it 6 times in a row. I was amazed. The living room had 2 folding chairs and a flimsy card table inside. Neighbors, most of them strangers, had given Mama 2 plates, 2 cups, 2 everything after her story got out. I realized instantly how convenient it was to have connected rooms. There was a spacious bathroom with its own skylight, a big tub, a sink with cupboards, no peat moss that needed shoveling. The kitchen had an oven, a stove with 4 burners, and overhead lighting controlled by a switch. No more kerosene. I described the remarkable features of this house in my notebook. A machine in our kitchen washes and dries dishes. There is a whole other machine for drying clothes too. We don't need a clothesline anymore. The metal box out on the front lawn, I realized, was for mail. I found joy in rushing outside when the USPS truck pulled up to the curb. Having a mailman meant we were seen. Someone else knew where we were, where our letters should go. Opening the mailbox felt like opening a Christmas present, even though there were mostly grocery store circulars inside. Easy was the first word I could think of to describe this life. One day I woke up to the sound of machinery on our street, the clanking of a garbage truck. Whoa, maybe we won't be going back to the dump, I thought. A truck arrived at the house weekly to haul our garbage away in plastic bins. But my favorite discovery came at dinner time. "I'm getting hungry, Miss Julia. Do you feel like having pizza tonight?" my mom asked. I nodded. "Where are we going?" "There's a Union Hotel Pizza in the shopping center close by. But now that we have a street address, we can get delivery." I was puzzled. "Delivery?" "So they can bring us the pizza." My eyes widened, positive she had to be joking. "Really?" "Yes." 30 minutes later, a cheerful guy brought a box straight to our door. "Thank you," Mama said as he walked back to a car with the restaurant logo painted on it. I couldn't believe it. A whole car just for pizza. We carried the food to the card table with our 2 mismatched mugs of Martinelli's sparkling apple cider. When I opened the pizza box, a delicious steam of tomatoes, mushrooms, bell peppers, and olives rose from the pizza. Mama and I grabbed 2 slices side by side, pulling a gooey mozzarella string taut until it broke in the middle between us. She held her slice up to me. "Cheers, Julia," and we clinked our pizza. The house was thinly decorated. Everything we owned had been gifts, so it still didn't feel quite like it belonged to us. But this was a home where Mama was in control, and she could talk on the phone without Daddy listening in. She could buy what she wanted at G&G Market, and Daddy wouldn't be there to put things back on shelves. When Mama said things would eventually be different, I believed her. Pizza wasn't a bad way to celebrate the possibility of an easier life. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Our next reader will be Eli Hansen. Eli is a nonfiction writer. He will be introduced in pre-recorded fashion by his thesis director, Kathy Miller, who is still sheltering near Manchester, England. Kathy.
Hello, everybody. Today I have the pleasure of introducing Eli Hansen. He was one of my graduate students. We worked together for many years at San Jose State. He came to us originally as a poet and then discovered along the way that he had a gift for creative nonfiction. And one of the wonderful things about working with grad students along their path at the university is I get to work with them in a lot of different guises and a lot of different levels. He worked with me as my teaching associate on Intro to Creative Writing. He wanted to be a professor, and he was an excellent instructor in the classroom, working with students. He had a terrific rapport with them. And he also worked with me on Read 68 as my managing editor. And we went to Minneapolis together to AWP. The following year, he published an essay in Read 69 called The Smell of Freedom, which touches on America's obsessions with guns. But today he is going to read from his excellent 237-page thesis, Life Between the Bridges, A Personal History of San Francisco. And it was a real joy for me to be his thesis advisor on this project because I lived in the city for many years and am myself a student of San Francisco lore, but reading Eli's book, I learned a lot of new things. So I give to you Eli Hansen.
Thank you all for that introduction. Just wanted to thank Kathy Miller for being my thesis director, helping me along through all these years and everything like that. Alan Soldowski as well, who has taught me so much about poetry, and that's really helped me with my use of language. I also like to thank Thomas Moriarty for being the third reader on my thesis committee. He gave me a lot of good, useful feedback. Also want to give a shout out to Professor Ed Sams, who I believe is here as well. I was a graduate assistant under him for a few semesters, which kind of helped me develop myself as an instructor. And also Professor Ryan Scannell, who kind of oversaw me when I was working as a teaching associate. So he helped me out quite a lot too. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, all the people I worked with over my years here at the MFA program, was really grateful for the time I got to spend with you guys. I really, really am. So thank you for that. So without further ado, here is here's an excerpt from my thesis, Life Between the Bridges, A Personal History of San Francisco. What is San Francisco? It's a shining city on 14 hills, skyline glowering over the horizon like a modern-day colossus of roads. It's the front door to America, so long as you're not coming from Europe. It is ancient, beautiful, egalitarian, and pure, or at least it feels that way. It's where the age of Aquarius dawned, and where the age of information is dawning. It is where the West was most wild and where the pioneering spirit grew soft. It is a city of hopes and dreams, opportunities and avarice, disappointments, disillusionment, and exile. It is a metropolis unlike any other and a town just like all the rest, where some of the most important events in history have unfolded and where uneventful little people live out uneventful little lives. For the hundreds of thousands who live within its 49 square miles and the millions who have lived there before, it is one thing and one thing only: home. If you're going to San Francisco, you'll need more than just flowers in your hair. Rents are high, so get yourself some roommates. Use Craigslist if you're square, Laundromat Flyer if you're with it, and select one of each. Roommate who works at Google and knows Google is evil. Roommate who works at Starbucks and has been trying to publish their chat book for 19 years. The roommate who composes electronica and is mostly deaf. The roommate you have sex with. The roommate you used to have sex with. And the roommate who never leaves their room. There will also be the roommate who drives for Uber. This will probably be you. There are no living rooms or dining rooms in San Francisco. Everything is a bedroom. You will have a chandelier for a reading light, a decommissioned fireplace for a closet, shoji screens, cubicle dividers, and thumbtacked bed sheets for walls. The sounds of sex and video games will be your lullabies, petty arguments over how to hang toilet paper your alarm clock. The kitchen will never be clean, the refrigerator will never be empty, and the laundry machine will never be unoccupied. Neither will the bathroom, especially when you need to use it. You can work any field you like in San Francisco, as long as it's technology. Good with your hands? Join an IT department. No basic math? Become a coder. Do you enjoy analyzing systems? Well, those two words are right there in the job title. You can do tech law, tech finance, tech HR, tech sales, tech globally integrated supply chain utilization, and tech. There's even technical writing for the English majors. But that's not why you're here. People go to New York to get rich, and Los Angeles to get famous. People go to San Francisco when they want to make a difference. That's why every other person you meet will be an aspiring artist, writer, or activist. It's why every cafe hosts an open mic, and why flyers bearing homespun poetry outnumber those for lost dogs. It's why drunken barroom conversations are about politics instead of sports, and why protesters block downtown streets with such regularity that motorists accept them as a routine part of traffic. Youthful optimism is the coal this city burns. It's also why all the tech companies are here. The ones founded by guys who dropped out of Harvard so they could move fast and break things. The men who see history as one long march of progress and who treat the word disruption like a good thing. It's one of the drawbacks of living here. Gentrification, the housing crisis, the proverbial elephant in the room. San Francisco is expensive, really expensive. Ungodly, soul-crushingly, violating the Geneva conventionally expensive. A one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco now averages $3,500 a month, though by the time this goes to print, that will probably be higher. That's $42,000 a year for rent. At the city minimum of $15 an hour, you'd only need to work 62 hours a week to cover that. For a little less, you might find lodging in a tent pitched in someone's backyard or a van parked in someone's driveway. No, I'm not kidding. For some, the housing crisis is all that matters. They look at San Francisco and see a dystopian cyberpunk hellscape that would put the imagination of William Gibson to shame. Ask a longtime resident what they think of Ed Lee or the Ellis Act, and you'd be hard-pressed to find more vitriol at a manure plant. San Francisco is dead, they say, or at least dying. The city has lost its soul and become a sleepwalking, zombified husk. The pretty architecture and grand vistas are mere lipstick on a capitalist pig. A pig that chews through the disadvantaged as thermite chews through steel. They will regale you with stories of retirees thrown onto the streets, of poor families made homeless, of greedy landlords striking Faustian deals with Airbnb, and of corrupt politicians who can't muster even the pretense of giving a fuck about the poor. That is the state of San Francisco, they will say. And some of it is true. There's a place all San Franciscans fear to go. It's the place all people go when the economy says they no longer get to call their home, home. It's a three-letter word that every English speaker, everywhere, fears more than perhaps any other word in the dictionary. Out. I have lived in San Francisco for the entirety of my adult life, and during that time I have lost many friends. Some have died, but most have gone out. They have gone north to Portland and Seattle, where the seeds of progressivism might still be nurtured. They've gone east to their hometowns of yore, putting to the test the maxim that you're never too old to start again. Some have gone south to Los Angeles, San Francisco's rival. This move is almost always accompanied by an angrily raised middle finger that is lowered slowly and reluctantly, if it is lowered at all. A few have left the United States altogether, abandoning the country that allowed the dream that was San Francisco to come to such a total and indignant end. Yet some remain. Some have accepted the hardships, the sacrifices, and the responsibilities that come with being a citizen of San Francisco in the 21st century. I am one of them, and there are more of us than people think. San Francisco contains multitudes, but its most defining characteristic is resilience. This city has endured so much in its lifetime. It endured the bacchanalia of the gold rush. It endured the 1906 earthquake. It endured bubonic plague and fire, labor strikes and race riots. It endured Jim Jones and Charles Manson and Dan White. It endured urban renewal and the AIDS epidemic. And it will endure the housing crisis. How could it possibly be otherwise? The sigil of San Francisco, the unifying municipal icon emblazoned upon the city flag, is a phoenix rising from the ashes, wings outspread, head upraised in haughty defiance. Beneath that sigil are the city's words: oro en paz, fierro en guerra. Gold in peace, iron in war. San Francisco, for all its external loveliness, does not wilt in the face of hardship. At this city's core is a resolve as hard and unyielding as tempered steel. San Franciscans may revel on Castro Street during Pride, but they'll march all the way to the White House when the rights of their friends and allies are threatened. They may party and drink on Labor Day, but they will shut down entire seaboards to protect the rights of their fellow workers. They may amuse themselves with trivia nights, SantaCons, half-hearted marathons, and week-long film festivals, but between these diversions, they put in the hard work of making this world a better place. This city, these people, this 7 by 7 mile patch of sand and fog at the edge of the world knows how to endure the hard times, knows how to embrace the good times, and knows how to fight like hell to speed the transition from one to the other. Hearts as soft as gold, wills as hard as iron. That is what it means to be a San Franciscan. Thank you.
Thank you, Eli. How appropriate your reading was with all of us not getting to see much of San Francisco these days. And thank you for reminding us that it's there. Next, we'll hear from MFA candidate, another nonfiction writer, Carmen Sela Kennedy. She introducing her thesis as her director, Selena Anderson. And in just a minute, we'll be hearing Carmen's reading on pre-recorded video, but she's with us now, and let me ask her to say hello and introduce her project. Carmen?
Hi, everybody. How are you? I really appreciate this opportunity. Thanks for arranging it, Professor Soldowski. I want to thank my committee, my thesis committee, Dr. Anderson, Dr. Norris, and Dr. William Harlan, who is not on the call, but very much appreciate all the input that I've gotten from all of you. And a little bit about this, the thesis. It's a collection of short stories, and you'll hear one that has subtitles throughout, and I think it perhaps kind of rings a bell in this time of COVID, this really strange time we're going through, because the first place hit was nursing homes, so, or hit the hardest. So it begins in a nursing home. And thanks again, everybody. A love letter. The end. My aunt, after being groomed by a nursing home attendant, drew in all 4 limbs and lay there rigid like a pill bug protecting its middle. Her eyes bore through me. I was bothered by the thought that some part of her, still viable, was at that time excavating my thoughts. But then again, how could she with her body contorted like that, her eyes opened wide and her breath percolating? Hospice tried to anticipate her needs. We waited, speaking sotto voce, wondering what she would say if she could say something, but she was nonverbal. I'm guessing, maybe hoping, the irony of Alzheimer's had wiped away her cares, and with them her worst memories. Financial insecurity. The couple of failed marriages. 1980-something, the decade her sons acquired the immunodeficiency and shriveled like fruit that had gone to seed. Cancer took root in her bosom after they died. It fed where they once grew fat. She sipped poisoned cocktails in oncology and lamented the silver crown of curls that sloughed off of her head. I'm guessing Alzheimer's wiped away her lesser memories too, ones she might have otherwise dismissed. A loved one's disposition at any given time, kindnesses, foibles, and the day she was diagnosed with this death sentence. The woman before the disease. She was propelled by a bit of useful obsessive compulsiveness, and with it, she kept a lovely, impeccably neat home. She spent hours on hair, makeup, and that Ivy League style she fashioned from clothes handed down to her by her mother's employer. She made up for what she lacked in quantity with quality. That is to say, a few pampered Pendletons and a couple of crisp broadcloth shirts can combine in infinite ways. This is how she taught me to recognize value, especially my own. She had abandoned with the onset of Alzheimer's all the effort she once put into her appearance. Her perfectly pinned curls were supplanted with wild wisps. Her classic style, the diaper and house coat. Her cares with the encroachment of neurofibrillary tangles of plaque. My aunt was completely dependent by the time she became my responsibility. I'm sure dementia exceeded anything she could have imagined when she signed her advance directive so many, many years ago. It was a love letter of sorts, written in the wake of AIDS and death, a document that sought to spare me the doubt she must have felt making decisions on mortality for her dying sons. Her advance directive was a loving gesture, her attempt to spare me her pain that I duly replaced with my guilt in handing her over to a nursing home. That terribly difficult decision was precipitated by consecutive nights watching her son down and worrying that she would reach again across the stove and attempt to rinse her hands with blue flames, or tip into the living room and confuse the bergère chair with the bathroom commode. A bucket of ammonia and water were always at the ready, but I confess, I was not good at either the constant cleaning up or caregiving. The mixed blessing. Amberwood Gardens was not the first nursing home I visited, but it was the last. I would like to think the friendly staff and the smell of its recently shampooed carpet made it so, but honestly, I was tired and had simply surrendered, signing my aunt's pension away in what seemed like an act of desperation. Cynical? Yeah, primarily because elder care's high cost had me seeing red. It had a monopoly on aging in a world where everyone's growing old. My aunt would have said with reassurance, count your blessings. And Amberwood was, despite all my reservations, one of them. It was located in San Jose, off a major highway, 1 block west of a well-worn avenue, tucked in a decent neighborhood straddling suburbia and gentrified dwellings. It was conveniently close to home. Its staff was competent. It was a rest home, truly. And my aunt's last years were better there than they might have otherwise been at home. Its lounges and corridors were clean, unrivaled by its peers in this sense, but nevertheless a nursing home, a last resort. I had, early on, put my aunt in adult daycare. I appreciated the concept of it being like childcare inasmuch as staff would supposedly engage the attendees in different ways, most of whom were high-functioning when my aunt was not. Unfortunately, this made it unsustainable. It was 2014, and the median cost of adult daycare was $77 per hour. I thought the amount was exorbitant, but it afforded me a little nap before I picked her up, brought her home to once again sundown in the wee hours of the morning. Both cost and the advanced stage of the disease in my aunt made daycare, and I might add its counterpart, residential care, inaccessible to us long-term. Neither option accepted Medi-Cal, the California state program that supplements the cost of care for those who can little afford it. Amberwood, the nursing home, did. California's annual median cost for a nursing home is about $125,000. Therefore, everything she had, pension, Social Security, and meager savings were paid to the home. Medi-Cal made up the difference. Nursing homes have the capacity to leverage a system of guaranteed payment, guaranteed patience, and the guarantee that tired family members will sign up for a chance to rest easy. It seems a little unfair considering nursing home care should be an extension of health care, and health care should be universal. Dedication and duty. The Amberwood Gardens sales representative was dedicated to her job. She knew all the right places to pause. your aunt will be at home here. And all the right places to push. Our staff is equipped to provide 24-hour care, and this is something well-meaning families simply can't match without serious fatigue or financial burden. She was right. The nursing home was simply better. She handed me a napkin. I looked at it thinking she had given it to me, anticipating this part of the reckoning would inspire some tears. I suppose I wanted to produce some for her, but I didn't. If I had, the napkin would have been apropos of that, but it was instead apropos of her soft skills, which she discreetly used to offset her hard sell. Nothing says sign here like freshly baked cookies, and what could only be described as a sales office coup d'etat, snickerdoodles appeared. I took one from the plate she had kindly offered me. Oh, thanks. I reviewed the resident's menu she had opened before me. It was full of comfort foods, like shepherd's pie and mac and cheese, foods meant to consume the biting sense that I'd filled my aunt. Part of it was clever merchandising, and part of it was just proof that someone other than me was better suited to care for her and prepare her meals. During the 2.5 years my aunt was in Amberwood, Alzheimer's ate its fill. Her body went from bound to a wheelchair to bedridden. Her speech went from incoherent to non-existent. And her Alzheimer's ate at me too. Eventually, Amberwood became a chore, and I needed reasons to go there beyond the obligation I had to my aunt. After all, she could not walk, talk, or remember my visits. Would missing a day, a week, a month make a difference? When I thought about it this way, Alzheimer's seemed forgiving. That is, until my conscience grew scornful. Haven't seen you here in a while. And tried to trick me, suffusing the smiles of Amberwood staffers with my own self-contempt. Me looking at myself in their mirror faces. I kept returning, however, checking to see if my aunt was clean and comfortable, watching the caregivers buzz around and the patients mill about, and curiously looking forward to this.
So I'm going to ask Selena Anderson to say a few more words about Carmen's project. Selena?
Okay, sure. First, I just want to say what a pleasure it was to work with Carmen on her thesis. She was always prepared. She made every deadline, which as a writer is difficult to do. And I really appreciated her work. I think it's such an important story, undertold story. What really struck me about these stories in Bad Medicine was Carmen's command of voice and the really evocative sense of place that you guys have heard. And I love her characters that are witty, strong-willed, dignified. They're very colorful in the manner in which they speak. And they're presented to us with such care and such affection. You really, if someone is to write about you, you want it to be a writer like Carmen. And yeah, I'm a fan, and I think you guys will be too. Congratulations, Carmen.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Selena. Next, we're going to hear from a couple of poets. The first is our MFA candidate who completed his degree requirements in December 2019. This is Vinny Lopez. Vinny completed his MFA work, and I was director of his thesis, so I'll introduce him. Vinny is a poet and fiction writer who first came to San Jose State as an undergraduate, earning his BA in creative writing in 2015. He began the program in fall 2017. While in the program, he received a prestigious Bertha Kahn Fellowship, among other awards, including awards for his poems and several Phelan Awards in the free verse category. He completed his MFA thesis, a book-length poetry sequence titled Almond Songs. He completed it December last year. It was a pleasure to be his director, and now here he is reading from his collection, Vinny Lopez.
Hello, everybody. First, I want to thank everybody on my committee. Alan especially helped me since undergrad to graduate school. Professor Keenan Norris, Professor Reverthy Krishnaswamy as well. Additionally, a wide range of other professors who weren't on my committee, like Professor Nick Taylor, Professor Bayer, Professor Anderson. They all really helped me through my process. Okay. I will be reading poems from each of the 3 sections spanning the entire collection. Okay. New folds. Moon crater hands fold thick yellow paper and rip a thin rectangle off the end, leaving a perfect square behind. ¿Qué vas a hacer? I slur the words out of joy. What you gonna make? Sapo, barco, avión, paciencia, amigo. Each pleat and crease led to a fresh unknown. Variables, planes, canyons, collapsing diamonds I'll never understand. I could never guess. Tulipan, a sailboat. Dragon, a hat that didn't quite fit my head, made of paper somewhere between midnight and morning blue. I can never guess. Rosa, estrella, mariposa. The furrowed square cannibalizes the space from before into something just as true. A wrinkled hand metamorphosis of pulp from paper sun into kite, into spearhead. Paciencia, mijo. Her hands move sharply, each flattened point married to the other in harmony, each crease horizon honed, like seas crimping right past Genesis, crinkling softly towards something brand new. Her fingers are short and callous, yet still soft somehow with memories of masa dust and barbed wire and paper marigolds for tombstones. The yellow diamond inverts itself, rigid edges morph into life, both natural and unnatural when I begin to see it. Mountain and valley folds ruffle into a great pair of wings. Sun yellow, now a beak, a plumed tail. Mira, mira como vuela. There, a crane soaring above an infinite marsh, eyes scanning the reeds for witless frogs, flapping, kiting, gliding towards somewhere ancient and full. Next poem. At the bird sanctuary with someone you haven't said I love you to yet. The low cairns stop wind, but not time. The teals quack and prosper. You ask, remember that morning when the nice geese gave us a honking jazz? You passed me a skinny joint. They were loud and soft. I could still feel our sleeping bag stirrings of warm youth and hunger. Soft, like a field book filled with fast sketches of birds and pressed feathers. I remember the smell of bacon fat, of sweat and pine cones, her look of blue glass, once jagged, now riverstone worn. Loud, like silence in hospital beds, like dewed marigolds and stones that swallow and spit up lost homes. In the belly of dusk, we drink warm, and pelicans and ducks restart their avian bebop. You listen to me lily pad stories about nothing. We blow rings of smoke and we laugh about dumb things. You never try to shield your laugh. Your zigzag twister of pumice scrubs white stalactites from my cold ribs, bone by stone with heathered songs. Here, in the belly of dusk, we finish our boxed wine and open rum. The orange of sunset crawls from our brown skin. The cold has silenced the down improv. Stars wade in forms of ladles and bears and belts. We, cold but warm, like drunk egrets hunting for fat mice and curled prawns, have found something. Big drought and youngish lovers in the middle of nowhere. Let's meet in the almond heat of Salida, California. Nowhere, California. No exit for anyone, California. Let's juice our pasts into lukewarm nutrition. With a stolen cooler of Tecate and our skeletal brown river, we'll wipe tractor dust from our eyes and from our wet armpits, from your bikini lines and my gym short tan. The sad gator skin oaks and ancient willows can't lie. The smell of the diamond dog food factory, like a slaughterhouse, less sinister, just as omnipresent, just as comforting, mingles with drought-enhanced cow manure. The drought amplifies moon violence, magnifies mosquito concerto. The lizards hide all day. Let's wade with the last prawns, and when our skin starts to hurt a little bit, let's smoke filterless cigarettes in the king-size bed of a dead Chevy Silverado, parked beyond a path of 6-foot sunflowers and dizzying bumblebees and mazes of dragonflies and under 40-year-old oaks. The shade and the joint in my writing bag is much sweeter with company. Fear of death disturbs no river. Stanislaus, naked in the sun, hides nothing. It trickles happy, patient, brittle like every other oxbow, every prawn. The oaks shift under cirrus and blue. Crack yes, yellow yes, cry yes, die, not yet. No, old comrade, the berries are not here, but hardtack paths are. Broken and baked victims, you are not magnificent or delicious. The river recedes into motionless bullfrogs. The beach breathes, steps on the balls of its black feet. It waltzes. The stones go dormant, gone and hot. Sons of Seth and daughters of Cain melt ice. The fog is local and it is cold, for now, afraid and brave. I am not a killer like you. Fear of death haunts windowsills and owls. I have died, yet I still swim. I kick the remaining silt into clouds. It settles into a new strata with new considerations. Clay, forget me not, or do, just do quickly. You gossip of yesterday's swollen cisterns. Lily pad your memory into an old Gatorade bottle. Purify you, purify me, lonely, the cells. Teach me patience, the eternal kind. Rain will swell and fall someday, and all want will be slaked, and I will learn what color green really looks like. Necrosis. Perdí mi duende en un volcán lleno de 1,000 millones cráneos azules. Ahora pescamos las lágrimas de un mundo que nunca existió. Mira, mira cómo la caña tiembla, como el flotador baila. Atrapamos el pez de oro, el pez de corriente de magma, con sus labios orquídea, el pez lleno de nervios y escamas muertas. Ahí está una cobija de lana celestial, cómodo, caliente, como los panzas de placas tectónicas, como los dedos necróticos de mi abuelo, brillante, negro, hinchado, tímido. Mira, mira ahí. Ahí está mi duende en el hoyo negro de mi espíritu, en el ombligo de las canchas aztecas, sangrientas y libre, en la luna de la última día, en el ojo tinto del Pacífico. Mire, aquí estamos comiendo pecado empanizado. No estamos felices ni deprimidos, llenos de luces de muerte. Mi grito es eterno, como cartuchos de plata y jade. Cuando me muero, por favor, deja que los colibríes me tomen. Final poem. Velorio, which means wake. The past don't matter much when I see the coffee baby's dimples and her fat legs scuttling under thin Jesus, bloody brow beyond cold casket and 6 wreaths of daisies, of mums, of marigolds. You don't matter once the candle's lit. You do. I am certain, no more than glass-stained saints, as still, why do you have to be gone? I have been looking in every grain of wood and every pew in the way my grandma taught. Show your knees to the devil, bow your head, cup your heads to the clouds. Grandma said you'd always be in my chest. All I hear is the baby laugh. She's louder than all our tears at once, piercing and perfect. Each and every funeral recalls and constructs each and every funeral from before and after. Babies oblivious to the rhyme of sin seeping into our collars, tall and starched. Every black dress, black crucifix, black almond bark board bra are made for living. Every syllable, every hallelujah is followed by a footnote from the future, and they all allow our failures to breathe, to sing songs no one wants to hear, And when they do, no one applauds. They light a candle. They whisper, continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinny, for that powerful reading. And next, we'll hear from MFA candidate in poetry, Brandon Liu. As I am, again, his thesis director, I will introduce him. Brandon Liu has had a distinguished career as an undergraduate before he came into the MFA program, earning his BA in English with a creative writing concentration in May 2018. While he was an undergraduate, he served as president of the Poets and Writers Coalition. He entered the MFA program the following August. He's worked with Read Magazine as a member of the poetry editing team and has continued to take a lead role in helping us plan our Legacy of Poetry Day and festival activities. This year, Brandon received an Abraham and Eleanor Bazanker Scholarship. He'll be reading to us from his poetry collection, All Things Must Pass. It's with great pleasure I introduce Brandon Liu.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Professor Soldowski. I'd like to thank all the staff and faculty and peers who have helped make this collection possible. You've all done so much for me that I cannot thank you enough, really. This collection is an exploration in the themes of impermanence, time, and death, really, about how in the span of a human lifetime, there's only so much we can do. And confronted with that fact, what should we do and how should we feel? So I'll be reading some poems in each section. This first one's called Unopened Jars. Time is traveling backwards in directions that we cannot see, for the mistakes of our past manifest in our children's futures, a guidance of hands pulling and pushing, molding clay in shapes that only gods could conceive. Love is flying south for the sake of others, while jars of preservatives lie unsweetened in the cellar, waiting for the old man to stay a while and remember, because sweet as they are, they do not taste the way they used to. Its name is money. It's got me pinned, hands tied, face pressed against the wall. Leaning down, it whispers in my ear. Nice clothes you got there, and you're getting a nice meal to boot. What would you do without me? It sends me threatening letters in the mailbox, plagues my emails no matter how often I send them to the spam folder. It spies on me from the windows of shopping malls, behind the ATMs near the bank. It stops me at the gas station, telling me it knows I've got places to go, places to be. Sometimes I think I see it slinking around the house, putting its hands on my parents' shoulders, giving me a smile as it tightens its grip. Worst of all, it tells my only brother which friends he can go out with, what places are okay for him to eat at, all while giving him that same stiff smile and wrapping a fat, crinkly arm around his neck. The way we lie here. Was it inevitable that this war should occur? That my mother and father would flee eastward bound away from what rots the soil or congeals the streams with conceit, churned by a trembling hand at the trigger, barrel aimed at the neighbor's back, a burning smell only inches away as if to say, you cannot be happy here. We lie and make space for thought. A long drifting tide, our only escape. This boat should be a helicopter, one would think. The shadow of a plane passing by, the size of a child's hands. Better to let bygones be bygones, but we do not burn the pictures of our past. We carry them in our smiles, in our songs, They do carry, somehow, this weight, a swinging cartridge in the air, with every amount of impact as a falling star. Persistence. How far will you stretch this last beam of sunlight? To see the end of this addled road winding up and down this lonely hillside that people have forgotten, where deer and buck look to cross holes in these wire fences and mountain lions are known to roam. Will you struggle till your knees give out and your lungs no longer scream, till the muscles in your legs cry and the wind blast away the tears in your eyes? How far will you go to see the end of this road? And what will you give to know it will still be here when you are gone? Excuse my language in this next poem. I'm also told it could be a little graphic. It's called Traffic. Keep your hands on the goddamn wheel, and I will keep driving the fact that this city is nothing but a bunch of lunatics running a monkey show on the street. The tails hanging off the fluorescent lamps, the lights turning green, stop, red, go. Set reminder, stop texting. Boom, pop, pow. Who let the potholes get this bad? I am eating gravel up the wazoo, and I will not hesitate to share. Lines painted yellow, white. Stay in your lane, you son of a crash! Into windows, glass, buses, too yellow in the head to see that everything is turning blue. The trees, the sky, the grass, the lights are yellow. Please slow down. There are children present and walking down one-way streets, down crosswalks and sidewalks, a chip in the road, tire marks, skidding, skipping, roaring in the background. The distance too far to measure, but long enough to signal my hand, a middle finger, flicking a booger in the wind. I cannot be bothered to do so. Pardon my aging. It's been years since I last let the dust shake loose from my hulking form, afraid to follow up on old reminders. Be cooler, be kinder, my appearance too cantankerous, too candid this contour. And why am I still here correcting every person's words while accepting that change comes only at the turn of seasons, when I need no reason to see myself out of the hole I dug? So bug me about anything else besides the fact that acting up at this age might mean having to leave everything behind in blind pursuit of what it means to be alive. Try to grasp at sand, let it fall between my hands, and watch which way the setting sun illuminates the shadows falling from my face. This I confess to you. I am hurting inside, myself a pale form, a pile of sludge or waste nailed to the wall. For you, I am hurting myself. For you, I cannot give more time. I cannot live through your eyes as you cannot through mine. I can throw my heart at the wall, let it slide and smear on the way down before it falls and lands, with only a dull thud, small on the carpet. I can do however many things it takes to say I'm sorry, but an apology can only be sincere when it's ready. Disembodied voices. If you read this poem while I am not here, then my voice has become disembodied. Whose voice do you hear when you see these words left over? I am left as invisible, limb upon limb, tangled flesh in the air, my pulse breathing what is in the room. Some ghost on the page, a soul with no body but ink to bind myself to your mind, an echo of someone you once knew, still know. This next poem is the one that won the scholarship award. Twilight. In the backyard of the moment, the flies don't care if you're sad. The dog will sniff at your pants without asking how you're doing. And the sun will continue to set while the birds chatter and warble in the corner of your ears. The clover doesn't want to listen to your problems. It is too busy trying to bloom in the hard California soil as it does every year. Even under skies this blue, the wind remains convinced that it is winter, the chill apparent at the creases of your brow. How quaint, then, that the upturned wheelbarrow is covered with an old rice bag in case it rains. No one will notice if you sigh in the breeze. The garden is lonely enough without you. Passing through. If I break the wristwatch you gave my brother for his birthday, would you be mad? I might have cracked it on the road when I fell upon hard times served cold from my mother's lessons on life. There's not enough time to leave the planet to others, but I find myself still telling people to recycle. The phone line still goes to dial tone when I call to ask about my college loans. Where did the time go? You told me it really does rain in Seattle all that often, but it feels like a kick in the teeth to know that I can't wake up as early as I used to. The I voted sticker is still stuck to the wall where you put it. I've added a couple more since then. Writing. A bicycle will take me as far as I will take it, up the hill climbing, the pedals swing in lunar cycles, waxing, waning, crescent, full of vigor, brimming, the heat a passion, the love a drive, forward up the hill until again the wheels turn by themselves, a sliver of gold landing upon silver fields as I am flying down this hill. All right, last poem in 3 parts. Equilibrium. 1. After fire. There is quiet solitude in the falling cinders. The ash is fine enough to mistake for snow. On the ground, the wood chips smolder and glow. The sky is darkened above the silhouette of naked trees. The incense burns in silent prayer at the altar. The smoke dissipates slowly as if it too wishes to pay its respects. In time, the stick crumbles into ash along with its brothers, defiant red stumps in a field of white. The charred rocks burn with quiet intensity. The warmth a testament to their resilience. Even now, they seem to breathe and pulsate with life. Little black stones, the eggs of a sleeping phoenix. 2. Abundance. Drink, she says, offering me a glass from the dispenser. There's more than enough to go around. And I see she is not lying, as the employee behind her rolls another cart forward with more. There is enough, I tell myself, holding the glass to my lips, and as the water slides down my throat, cold and inviting, I am in that moment avocados and oranges, rice and almonds. I see the well without its prize, the lake without its treasure. I see a child's hand scooping nothing but mud and algae, yet still letting it all go to their mouth to drink before turning to me and asking if I know what it's like to be thirsty. I put the glass down, and she asks me if I would like another. I quietly thank her and tell her I've had enough. 3. Lanterns. The candle floats along the water, its only guide an origami boat. It joins its family in the procession, and they become a swath of fireflies. The river takes them gently downstream, while the moon stands as their witness. A small breeze licks the flames and makes waves across the water. Above, the trees rustle softly. As the boats reach the river's bend, I think we too could be like boats moving in the night. Thank you.
Thank you for that really strong reading, Brandon. Our next reader is an MFA candidate in fiction writing, whose name is Asa Murphy. Let me introduce Asa's thesis director, Nick Taylor, to tell you more about her.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for being here. The final 2 readers are both students who I advised. And they're both They're both sitting on books that I think you might be able to read in stores pretty soon. Asa's book, Bright Shiny, is a novel set in Italy in the 1980s. It calls to mind the work of Elena Ferrante and a number of contemporary European novelists, many of whom I didn't know before I started working with Asa. She's one of those students who is a pleasure to work with because you learn as much from her, probably more than she learns from you. And that was certainly true in my experience working with Asa. I love this novel, and I think a lot of people are going to feel the same way. The thesis committee that I worked with said, both of the other members of the committee said this was one of the best MFA theses they've read. And I quite agree. So Asa, take it away.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for all the encouragement and all the help and all the time. And I also want to thank Alan, because there were times when I wasn't sure I was going to make it through the MFA program because of the pressures of work and school and homework and writing and all that. But it's been a pleasure and a joy to work with you. And I also want to thank Professor Douglas, who is not here today. I'm going to read from this novel, and as Nick said, the setting is Italy in the 80s. What you need to know is in this, the narrator is a 38-year-old woman who is narrating her younger days, and in the scene that I'm going to read, she is 15. We get a family together. There is a father who lives in a small town in the Adriatic coast. There is a mother and the 2 children who live in Rome, away from the father after leaving. And it is a dark story. So if you've read Jane Eyre, well, this is the opposite of Jane Eyre in some ways. In the scene I'm going to read, the 4 of them are going furniture shopping, which was the mother's idea. The furniture store Mother picked out took up 2 floors in a building with an intricately scrolled facade. Inside, it was illuminated by 4 chandeliers that hung majestically from its frescoed ceiling, and a lamp on each accent table. On the coffee tables, urn-shaped vases were filled with lavender and white rose arrangements. Mother walked ahead, holding Melina by the hand. My sister turned to look at Father and me and urged us on. Navigating her way steadfastly among velvet-draped sofas and dining sets with onyx inlays, Mother was able to evaluate and discard pieces of furniture with one quick glance. This wood was too dark, that table the wrong size, most of the sofas were the wrong shape. No, they wouldn't do. A saleswoman in a 2-piece skirt suit and yellow scarf approached us. What is it you are looking for? She inquired in a velvet tone that matched our surroundings. We want a living room, a dining set, an entire house, said Mother, waving an arm. We followed the saleswoman's toned calves, which were propped by stiletto heels, to the end of the floor and back. Bored, I sat momentarily on a chair, which turned out stiff, and I had the sudden feeling the chair would end up in our house. I got up quickly. Mother shook her head vigorously at our saleswoman's suggestions while maintaining a composure of intent, never once giving up on the idea that the perfect set was tucked away among the junk, waiting to be discovered by her expert eye. What's on the 2nd floor? She said. Our higher-end lines and antiques, said the woman, and looked at the 4 of us more closely. Everything is one of a kind. On the 2nd floor, the walls were heavy with gilded ornaments. Mirrors set in thick, hand-carved frames reflected the crystal light thrown sideways by the chandeliers and sent it dancing on the peacock green wallpaper. Trays with antique teapots in delicate silver were arranged on the coffee tables, ready for the manicured jasmine lotion hand that would pour mint leaf tea on the nearby princely china.
Marble-topped console tables that evoked the palaces of the Renaissance lined the sidewall, and on them capped crystal bottles filled with blonde liquor. All of it, the furniture, the walls, the curtains, the china, had been painstakingly staged for a grand affair, for the descendants of barons and counts. The people who would have their convertibles parked by chauffeurs, women with heads covered in Hermes scarves, and men in shoes handcrafted at the same leather ateliers of Florence that used to fit the kings of France. In a few words, the people we weren't. Mother, unable to discern the distinctions between class, culture, and our threadbare apartment environs, convinced in fact that now, here among the finery of Rome, she was at long last in the midst of her element, straightened her back and pointed to an elaborately carved and austere-looking sofa in beige and its matching settee. "That, I'm afraid, is sold," said our saleswoman. "I'm very sorry." "Sold? Who bought it?" asked Mother, implying that the names of the local aristocracy were hiding in her address book, and she might, at one moment, reach inside her purse to prove it. "Mrs. Ronaldi and Via Condotti," responded our saleswoman, and waited for the heady implications of both names to settle on us. "This might be a while," whispered Father, and took a seat next to me. Unmoved, impervious, Mother stood next to the prized sofa. "This is the perfect set. This will fit my living room exactly. It is the right color, the right style. It's the only one I've found that will do," she said. "Yes, it is a beautiful set, isn't it?" said the saleswoman in a professionally patient tone. "It is so unfortunate somebody grabbed it before you." "But what does it mean they grabbed it? It is still here, isn't it?" "Technically it is, yes," said the saleswoman, and pulled down her scarf, freeing her neck to breathe better, "but there is a deposit on it. It is only a matter of days before it gets delivered." For just an instant, my mother's face changed. A shadow flew across it, as if a hawk had blocked her sun with its wings. Then she pushed her chin up. "This is the one we want," she said, sending Father a measured glance meant to elicit a nod of his head, a significant movement of his chin, some sort of quiet consent, his blessing on the transaction to be. "Isn't it, Denton?" she urged when my father failed to register the cue. Father shook his head as if he'd just come out of a dream. "Is this the one, Angelica?" Without responding to him, with a sharp movement of the head, Mother turned back to the saleswoman, eyes glinting. "My husband is an American," she said, a statement that should explain first and foremost his apathetic behavior, but which was being brought forth, albeit after much internal self-debate, as the final proof, the red wax seal on the scroll that registered otherworldly wealth. "I see," said the saleswoman, studying Father's face. "So," Mother went on, with a final glance at Father and a wink that was meant to signify that this had been his game plan all along, "she's totally a translator, the tireless conveyor and executor of his transatlantic wishes. We will pay for the entire set now, not just a deposit." This last word she said with a tinge of scorn, as if a deposit was nothing more than an illicit concern. Taken aback, the saleswoman struggled for words. "I have to consult with the owner," she said finally. "He's not here at the moment." Yes, yes, consult," said Mother. "I am sure you can reach him by phone." The saleswoman excused herself and walked downstairs. We heard the sound of her fingernails against the phone's number plate and the unmistakable movement of the dial as it spun back to position after each turn. She spoke in low tones while my father and I sat erect on the sofa that was to become ours. "Un Americano," we finally heard the saleswoman's voice, in a tone which conveyed that such entitlement was to be expected of an American, and had to, in the name of Italian hospitality and grace, but no, never for the sake of profit, ultimately be accommodated. Back on the first floor, I waited next to Melina, cushioned on a modern-looking couch, while my parents leaned over a desk and signed papers. Mother had managed to add a few items to the day's score simply by pointing: a Chippendale style side table, a half-dozen chairs with sable-shaped legs, an oriental vase. Father took his wallet out, and Mother finally sighed and let her head rest against the high-wing chair. During the drive back, she urged us all to sing. Why the faces, she said when no one turned responsive except Melina, who sang something back. But Melina didn't count, for she had always belonged to Mother. Her will soft and malleable under Mother's grip, never since day one having presented her with a challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Asa, for reading to us from your novel. And last, we'll hear from the MFA fiction writing candidate, Andrew Van Way. Introducing him once again is Nick Taylor. He is Andrew's thesis director. Nick?
It's quite a photo of Andrew. I like that. That could be his author photo. This book, Blind Sight, is a real accomplishment. It's a very long thriller that has many false endings and twists. It was incredibly exciting to read. I learned about a number of technologies that I knew very little about before, and enjoyed the forays into the speculative world as well. I have no idea what Andrew's going to read today, which section, but it's all good, so enjoy.
Thank you to the MFA program for their support, and to my committee, Dr. Scannell and Dr. Douglas, to my thesis advisor, Professor Nick Taylor, and my friends and family, and to my wife, who's had to suffer me for the past 3 years. Writing is lonely, and it's soul-crushing, and often the difference between a good story and a raging dumpster fire is just time and encouragement. So for those of you supporting writers, reading early drafts, listening and spitballing with us when we discuss our crazy ideas, thank you for this time and encouragement. We really couldn't do this without you. My novel Blind Sight is a techno-thriller set at the intersection of police procedural, near-future sci-fi, and medical horror. Silence of the Lambs meets Michael Crichton. It's a hunt for a killer who can move through walls and crush a heart with its thoughts, an entity visible only to Caitlin, a blind agoraphobe who can travel the world with her mind, yet hasn't left her apartment in years. This is part of the opening chapter, and it takes place in 1989. It began deep in a place of iron and stone with a blinking red light on a security console and a man who thought, this better be good. Security guard Roger Fenton straightened his thermos and wiped the coffee stain from his desk. To the right, a framed photo of his wife beside the winking red light. To the left, the TV's blue hue. East Germans on screen, taking hammers to the wall, shattering concrete and bending rebar. West Germans gathering at the Brandenburg Gate, welcoming the fall. A historic moment, President Bush said, his face filling all 9 inches of the portable TV. Then came the static. Roger smacked the old Sony. This was breaking news, damn it. The alarm can wait. Then the TV screen exploded. Roger's annoyance vanished. So did his hearing, along with half his left ear. His lips, which had sneered at the alarm seconds ago, were now speckled with glass, front teeth, crimson shards. It would be minutes before he noticed the holes. Now, he only tasted the tang of adrenaline. Now, the alarm had his full attention. Roger pushed the chair off, pulled himself up. With a flick, he depressed the red lockdown switch. Then he was on his feet, running down the hallway. Klaxons wailed along the concrete walls. Machinery rumbled deep in the facility. Emergency systems now coming online. As he inserted his key card in the reader at the restricted end of the hall, he felt, no, he knew something was behind him. A frigid glare settled upon the nape of his neck. Impossible. He was the only guard on duty. For an 8-hour shift, this corridor was his. 300 feet of metal and concrete, 2 magnetically locked doors, 1 at each end. Roger's employers had given him all he needed, a thermos and a gun, a new IBM computer, and an old Sony TV. And they had given him orders. In case of emergency, guard the far door. Trembling, he tongued the shards of his front teeth. Needles pierced his jaw as he plucked glass from his face. He was wounded. Yes, he needed medical attention. To hell with this job. Then he heard the voice. Help! He spun. The hallway, his hallway, bathed in flickering red light. Color-coded piping threaded the walls, blue for compressed air, green for steam, orange for chemicals. His TV splayed open and sparking, but it wasn't the dying Sony that loosened Roger's bladder, nor the acrid fumes of burnt circuit boards, the whining of his burst eardrum, the alarms crying, "Eew, eew." It was the woman floating in the hallway, or rather it was half of her. A glistening form, nude and wreathed in smoke, hung in the air with arms outstretched. Wet hair clung to her breasts, curtains over a heaving chest. Her stomach was translucent. Where hips should have met thighs, flickering ribbons swayed like kelp in gray water. Warmth dribbled down Roger's leg, his courage pooling in a size 11 boot. "Help me, please," cried the half-formed woman. She was 20 feet away, yet her words enveloped him. A wet whisper in his ear bristled his neck. "Make them stop." In a blossom of red glass, the lockdown lights burst. Shadows swallowed the halls. The wailing klaxons sighed as the electrical systems fell online. Darkness and silence. Only the ambient groan of the mountains above these subterranean halls. Roger's left hand crossed his hip, unclasped his flashlight. His right hand fumbled for his service revolver. With two snaps of a leather clasp, he had his .38 special in one hand, his mag light in the other, wrists crossed in the Harry's technique. Funny how fast his training came back. What wasn't funny was the hallway before him. 100 yards of dark concrete, a sprinkler system and colored pipes and vast red shadows. His guard station far off, the dying television still hissing and sparking, and no legless woman, no floating torso, no trace she had ever been there. Deep machines were coming back to life, drowning out the ee of his damaged ear. He could make out the rattlings of his mag light bumping his revolver, could feel his heart beating in the back of his throat, lub-dub, lub-dub. Bulb by bulb, the hallway glowed red again, the klaxons returned. What if I'm concussed and not thinking straight, Roger thought. Or worse, what if I'm losing my mind? No half-formed woman had floated there. Such a thing was illogical, impossible, insane. Behind him, the restricted door whirred open. In 9 months, he had never seen a soul step through. Emerging now was proof there were others here deep beneath this mountain. "Damn, you're on backup power too," the man said. Roger placed him in his late 20s, hairline starting to recede, a pale face behind shattered glasses and a torn lab coat. "Did they get your fuses yet?" "What fuses?" Roger stammered, hard to make S and Z sounds with broken teeth. He cleared his throat, spoke slow. "What's happening?" "Never mind that," the man said. "Now listen to me. What's important is what happens next." His voice trembled, yet his words had an academic locution, trained and precise. "I don't understand. I don't follow." Roger stole a glance past the scientist. Beyond the restricted door lay the unknown, a blank, even on the evacuation maps. Roger glimpsed a short hallway and an open chamber, loose lights swaying above what might be an auditorium. "We've had a cascade, a real proper fuck-up," the scientist said. Roger caught the echo of a British accent. "Now, Roger, I need you to listen. Can you do that, Roger?" Roger blinked. This man knew his name. Yes, I can." "Good. At the other end of the hall, past your security station, there's an override console. You've seen it, yes?" Down the hallway, 60 yards at least, 12 buttons and a steel grill set into the wall. Roger had passed it each shift, given it no more notice than the water fountain. Now he truly saw it for the first time. "You put your security code in, then press star, then input the following, 773 star star. Roger glimpsed an ID on the lab coat, F. Linamore, MD. 773 star star. Roger, say that back. 773. Roger cleared the blood, enunciated, star star. "Your code first, then star," Linamore said. "Then the numbers. Good man. What about you?" "We've got to secure our lab," Linamore said. "But you need to secure this facility. Roger, this is what you've been hired for." "It is?" Roger swallowed. "Indeed. Now go. Run." What Roger lacked in speed, he made up with momentum. Then, 10 lumbering steps later, and what unfolded from the red shadows brought him to a sliding halt. Thank you.
Thank you so much for reading to us, Andrew. And thanks to you all MFA graduates and candidates who we've met with today. Now for the hard stuff. For the next few minutes, maybe no more than 10, because we've been going on now over 90 minutes in the program. We'd like to ask you in the audience to ask these candidates some tough questions. The faculty perhaps first, and then questions from the audience. So you can unmute yourselves. We'll maybe preview a few questions too on the chat if you would prefer to ask your questions that way. You can direct your questions to individual MFA candidates. You can ask the whole group. So please, start with the faculty. Who'd like to be first? Who has a question for these fine writers? Keenan Norris.
I'll go first. So I have a question for Carmen. First of all, thank you for reading that fine piece of work. I think we all enjoyed it. I'm curious about I had the honor of working briefly as your thesis, as your interim thesis director. I'm curious about the balance of narrative and social commentary in the work, and just how you, if you could just say a word about how you kind of balance the two, since the narrative obviously has, the piece obviously contains both. So can you just talk about that?
So thanks, I appreciate the kudos. And of course, I appreciate all the support that you give me, because you haven't just worked with me on this, you're working with me on other stuff too. So thank you immensely. Yeah, in terms of it being a nonfiction piece, I want very much to insert real life things, right? You'll get a bit of my political commentary in that, kind of slipped in. You'll get a bit of my worldview in that, but you'll also get some facts, and that's where the research comes in. The other side of that, in terms of balance, I did not know how enamored I was going to be with fiction when I started this whole journey. And maybe my next turn, hey, Professor Soldowski, I'll come in and do the program as a fiction writer. But the funny thing is, in all the fiction classes that I've taken, and I think Professor Taylor was one of my first teachers. I learned some fiction technique in terms of using dialogue, in terms of fleshing out character, in terms of painting scene and setting. And so you'll see that kind of interwoven with facts, basically. So yeah, I think that my pieces in my thesis tend to be heavier on the fiction technique side. However, these are my experiences. It is actually memoir, maybe with a bit of embellishment. But then, yeah, there's a lot of research that goes into it too, because there are things that I learned through my real life experiences that I just did not know in as much depth as should be added to essays that actually inform. So that's where the research has come in. Classes in sociology that Professor Soldowski so kindly allowed me to take for credit while I was in the program, classes in women's studies, classes in African American studies. All of this extra knowledge that was fact-based worked to inform what I was writing. So kudos to the program and Professor Soldovsky for having that progressive approach to learning. Yeah, I hope that answered your question. I've got Salah with me, my hubby, my better half.
Thank you, Carmen, for your answer, and Keenan for your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other faculty members want to ask something?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. This is Professor Taylor. I'd like to ask a question of Andrew Van Wey and Daniel Ballone, both of whom are working with a lot of material and in their fiction, and who did a lot of research to master that material before they started working on their drafts. And I wanted to hear a little bit about what you learned from that process.
Andrew, would you like to go first?
Why don't you go? You're already unmuted.
Okay, perfect. There were a series of really fortunate coincidences in my research that I was able to just kind of follow the adventure of the tangent. My friend showed me the movie The Sting in the course of writing this novel, and that it gave me a setting for the criminal aspect. And I happened to come across this great book of essays and speeches by an entomologist from Harvard in the 1920s in the San Jose State Library. So there's something to be said for wandering around the shelves of a university library and picking up interesting books and cracking them open, because that really gave a framework for a lot of the biological science. And there was stuff that just fit into the story really well. There was stuff that guided the story in different directions. And so I would say managing the content is more an exercise in staying curious and following what's fun. And it makes research a delight.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Daniel said. For me, I think a lot of it is just kind of listening constantly. I've been working on this story for 15 years, since I was an undergraduate, and it's evolved dramatically. Some of the technology that was in this story that was just sort of around the corner when I wrote it a long time ago is now technology that is yesterday. So just sort of being aware of what's out there. My novel deals a lot with disinformation and fake news and deep fakes. And those were things that were kind of near future sci-fi when I had originally worked on this. And now those are things that are changing elections. So there's elements of technology out there that you just have to kind of constantly keep your antenna up. Neil Gaiman calls it the compost heap of the imagination. And I think that's the best way to summarize it. You just are out there reading stuff that's interesting. And at some point, there's a point of confluence where a couple of the ideas work together and they form something that you can build a story around. So.
Really good answers and good question, Nick. Carmen, do you want to ask a question before we open it up, or should I go ahead? You want me to? Okay. For the poets and really for everybody, but I'm thinking of the poetry. How do you balance in your material between how much of it is autobiographical and really revealing of your personal life and personal history, family history, and in balancing that with working in the imaginative realm, so that you're not just writing a diary or a kind of chronicle of family, but you're writing something that is directed towards a larger audience.
With my project, which follows a young Latino living in the Central Valley and all his problems, a lot of people thought that it was firmly autobiographical. And I've always said I like to take real events, real traumas, real strangeness, and filter it through kind of like a coffee filter of imagination. So I have like a pretty set ratio of like 70% my own experiences, and then I allow a 30% for wildness. And that's where I can add, embellish, or bring focus to an image or an event that I may have not directly experienced. A lot of people read, or who have read my thesis, think, oh, that's you the whole time. And I always have to remind them that no, it's actually a little bit of me and exaggerated in the environment that I knew best. So I try to keep a very strict ratio that it starts from me, but then I push it through just that weird imagination, and then that's how I come out. I am not a fan of, personally, I don't think I'll ever write like a memoir, nonfiction. It's my least favorite medium. It just makes me very nervous to be that exposed. So with this ratio, you know, 70-30, I could be very much myself, talk about myself, my family, my history, and my own turmoil, and then push it through somewhere a little bit more imaginative. The middle section of my thesis is very surreal, and I did not experience a lot of the things that my protagonist experiences. And I think that 30% wiggle room lets me play with, you know, verse and things like that, and image. So yeah.
For me, as an individual, I can only experience the world in a certain way because I am who I am. So in order to do justice to other perspectives, I would have to do extensive research, or maybe live a day in the life of someone else's shoes. But at the core of it all, our audience is humans, and as humans, we all have some general truths that we are all privy to. And when you figure out what that truth is, you're able to play with it. And so you're also, the balance there is that you're able to give your impression as an individual, what it is that you think about the world is true, and you put it in such a way that everyone can kind of relate to it. Because I've been told in some poems that I've written that some of them were a little too solipsistic, as in so self-centered and not able to really see around itself. And so in those poems, I had to think for a second what was making it so self-centered. And I realized that it was true to me, but not necessarily true to everyone. So keeping that in mind is how I balance in a poem how much of it is me and how much of it is a truth that can be related to. And so a lot of poems in my collection are personal reflections on my life, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they only function in that way as a autobiographical kind of writing. In a sense, I love poetry because so much meaning can be derived from a single person's words, in how that those words can affect so many people and their own lives.
Good answer, Brandon, and really thank you for the revision. I've been working with both these poets, and I know how much revision has gone into the manuscripts that you've submitted. And the hard work pays off. Because we're running short on time, I want to see if there are any audience members that have any burning questions, or Professor Moriarty, if you have any burning questions.
I do. Actually, my question was for Julia and Talia and Eli. What I found very interesting, with their readings and working with their manuscripts at different points, is how they effectively wrote from different ages of their lives. And I was curious, how do they cultivate that voice so it doesn't sound like them writing from right now as if they were 7, or as if they were 15, or as if they were 20? How do they get into that sort of frame of mind? And what's the craft to write so it reads well from a younger point of view?
Julia, do you want to?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, especially for my project. Over the past few years, I did struggle with the voice and the perspective. And, initially I was thinking I was going to write this book from sort of a perspective that is similar to Room, the novel. And it's very limited in language choice. And I realized that quickly. I was thinking, if I write this from a child's perspective in all ways, then I am limited in what I can actually share. So I think what I realized ultimately was you can evoke the sense of a child's voice through just language, and choosing words that maybe I would have said when I was 7 or 8, but still being able to, notice details that are more sophisticated and not necessarily details that I would have noticed as a child. But that's a really important question, and hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I just want to add too that, like, for me, I'm dealing with my 16-year-old self and my 32-year-old self, and I think, and it's braided, so I go back and forth between the me now and the me then, and so I did a lot of listening to music that I listened to as a teenager, and really trying to get myself in the mindset. But it can be, when you're dealing with traumatic experiences, it can be quite difficult to dip in and then sort of have to dip back out, which I know, Julia, you also are doing quite a bit of. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that when you're kind of writing from the perspective of a certain point in your life, I think the fact that you want to write from that perspective in the first place kind of means that you're already in touch with it. It's like you probably wouldn't write from a part of your life where you didn't feel particularly attached to that, where nothing particularly important happened, right? So like when I write about events that happened to me in the past, it's because they are kind of fresh in my mind, and it doesn't take a lot of work to kind of mentally put myself there again. It's not always a pleasant experience, because sometimes you're writing about things that happened in your past that were terrible, and you kind of have to go back and relive that trauma a little bit, so to speak. So it's not always fun. But I think that when it comes to creative nonfiction, and I think probably Julia and Talia will agree with me in this regard, that basically the hardest part is just being honest about what happened and what you feel about things. And if you're just willing to truly tell people what you actually think, and you're just willing to really put yourself out there, you're usually going to produce something of value, I think.
Yeah, I think going back to I try to go back to what's the truest thing that I said, because sometimes you get lost in everything else, and then you go back and you're like, no, what's the last thing that I said that's true, and then start from there.
That's a good question. We have just a little bit of time left. We've run long, but we've had a really great session. Again, this session is being recorded and will be streaming from the English Department website and on English Department social media, so you can watch it again, or parts of it again, or share it with others. So please do that sharing and watching. And we appreciate everybody's patience and attention for this what is now 2+ hours. And we will be coming to a close, but I want to give audience members a chance. So please, don't be shy. If you have something to ask, now's your time.
Sorry, can anyone hear me?
Yes.
All right, hi, my name is Richard Spangler. I'm going in for the MFA in nonfiction. And as a writer, regardless of what I'm writing, be it fiction or nonfiction, I guess this is a question to the candidates who have already written fabulous pieces of work. How do you get yourself into the editing process? Because obviously a first draft is a first draft, a second draft is a second draft. How do you commit that time to where you have to reread everything, proofread everything, make sure things flow properly? How do you get into that mindset, or is there like a secret to it?
I think for me, I'm constantly editing, and I know a lot of people, a lot of writers have different approaches to that question. I mean, a lot of us like to write, just free form and then edit later, but I think that I'm always wearing both hats. There are benefits and detriments to doing that at the same time. But I think if you can know when to take a break and then come back on a different day and just have a different perspective brought to the work, that takes a lot of the stress off of thinking, when am I editing? When am I going to see this with fresh eyes?
Yeah, I think that, going in, editing is the essential part, right? I mean, nobody writes something good on their first time around. It has to go through many edits, and a lot of times you kind of have to take a hacksaw to it and like get rid of things that you were really proud of and worked really hard on because they just don't fit into the story. And that's always kind of a painful process. I totally get sort of editing as you go along. I certainly am prone to do that too, as Julia said. But I think that for me personally, at least, what works best is to try to compartmentalize that, be in writing mode or editing mode, and don't really let those two overlap too much. It's like when you're feeling creative, when you kind of feel that spark, just let it flow out there. And like, even if you reach a stumbling block, you know, where you kind of don't know where to proceed, just put something down, even if you know it's not going to be that good, because then you've kind of worked through that barrier and you can kind of move on to the next part. And, you know, I think if you approach it with the perspective of, this is not the final draft, I'm going to have to edit this many other times, it just makes it seem a little less daunting because there's less pressure on producing something good right out of the gate, so to speak.
Yeah, I'd like to edit what, I'd like to echo what Eli said. Always be editing, just constantly, again and again. This is my thesis, and it's just another draft that I'm editing. Have space between those. So I tend to stagger projects. I have like 3 or 4 projects that I'm working on. I've been kind of tracking them on a Viz board. So that can allow me to jump from my creative to my editing phase, because they're 2 completely different parts of your brain. One of them, you're creating entire worlds, you're being consistent, you're trying to get a tone. Another one, you're actually refining, or maybe you're pruning or trimming. And time is just the most important thing. Put it away for 3 months and you'll see it with fresh eyes.
Do any other
Hi.
candidates want to
Hi.
speak?
Can I ask Talia a question about her thesis?
Oh, sure. Go.
Yeah. Hi, Talia. This is Bebe. I really enjoyed your reading, and I have a question. As your the title of your writing suggests, now I'm the same age as you, and as you answered earlier, that is between 16 and 32. So I haven't read the whole writing, but I guess there's a transition, a revelation, or something like a growth involved in this process between the 2 episodes. Compared to life stories or personal history, I guess this kind of growth is a more intangible thing, and harder for you, for the writer to grasp, but essential for our reader to understand what happens next. So I wonder how you tackled this problem during your writing process. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that question. So you're asking how I tackled my 16-year-old voice and my 32-year-old voice, how I've integrated them?
Not only the voice, but the growth in your thought and like, yeah, in your every aspect.
Yeah, the psychological aspect, yeah. That's a great question. Yeah, it's definitely an unfoldment, I would say. I think that Kathleen Miller would attest to this. When I started this project, I thought I was going into it writing a book about how my parents met at the airport, and I ended up writing about this trauma. I wrote the first scene I started in the abortion clinic. And I think it needed to come out, and that was maybe 3 years ago. And then I started playing with this idea. It was more interesting for me to tell the story from the perspective of someone now at the same age of my abuser was then, right? It's much more interesting for me to see sort of the lingering effects of trauma, and how I've sort of unconsciously, I think, layered within myself this story, and I think I've always wanted to write it, but I haven't been able to approach it. So yeah, it's been really, you know, to be honest, it's been really taxing at times, and particularly in this time of pandemic, when I'm, you know, alone a lot of the time, and I'm working on this, like, you know, abortion scene, right? So it's been, but I think yeah, I think it's cathartic in a way to go back and forth, and I think it's more interesting to look back and then to come back and braid it that way. It's more interesting and more engaging for the reader than if I just said, this is what happened to me. I don't know.
Okay.
Your question.
Thank you, Bebe, and thank you, Talia. Maybe one last question that's out there from somebody. some question that we can end on.
Hi, I would love to share or ask a question for Talia and Julia particularly. Dealing with trauma, because you were just talking about trauma, Talia, just how you manage the writing process with hitting on some of the things that you've been writing about and how you take care of yourself and, you know, just in a practical sense, how that works for you.
Great question. Julia, do you have anything?
Yeah, I'll take my mom's question. I don't know. I think taking care of yourself when you're writing something like this is the most important part, because if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't write anything good, or you can't write anything that's going to connect with other people. Tara Westover, if you're familiar with her, she talks a lot about how she wondered if the specificity of her story would alienate readers or unite them with her. And you would think that it, you know, would alienate at first, but when you are writing something that's so specific, like a story that I share in Talia's too, I think that allows readers to connect through that specificity. So I think just knowing that and keeping that in mind is part of taking care of yourself, writing traumatic, potentially, pieces.
Yeah, I agree with that, Julia. And I think also there's a, and maybe you can speak to this, Julia, I don't know, but for me, my experience has been, as I've been writing it, there is a deeper truth that I'm getting to. And the more I write, the more, and it's difficult because it is, you know, I'm writing about my family and people in my life. And so that's been another hurdle for me to then say, Mom, you know, this is what I'm writing about, right? So yeah, it's taking care of yourself. I'll echo that. It's a beautiful thing to self value yourself.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for everybody's attention. I especially want to thank Talia, Audrey, Daniel Balone, Julia Dunn, Eli Hansen, Carmen Kennedy, Vinny Lopez, Brandon Liu, Asa Murphy, and Andrew Van Way, and their intrepid MFA thesis directors and committee members for all the work that's gone into these projects. It's, as you can see, the result, and you heard it for yourself today, that these are books that are in the making. I hope the candidates have plans to work on them further, submit them to agents, to publishers, to magazines, to blogs, wherever you can find interest. We certainly want to encourage and support that. Come on into the Center for Literary Arts daily writing group. That's another way to stay connected. And I also want to especially thank the members of the audience, the friends, the family, and our incoming MFA cohort, many of whom were with us this afternoon. It's been a fantastic afternoon. I'm glad to have had the honor of bringing this to you from the MFA Thesis Zoom studio here in downtown San Jose. I then want to close by wishing everybody an excellent evening and continue to be safe, to shelter, and hoist that glass of champagne. I also want to put a big thank you and one last request before everybody leaves to Rachel Crawford, who has been our program engineer, making this all happen behind the scenes. Rachel, do you want to come out from the booth and take a bow? And Rachel, where are you?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Unmute yourself. And I don't know how to do this, but can we find a way to take a screenshot of everybody before we go?
Yeah, we can do that. I'm not sure if I'll...
What do you want us to do? Well, if you're there and you've taken your video off, put your video on. That's one thing that you should do.
I don't think everybody in one shot because there are so many wonderful participants here today, but I'll do my best. So
okay. So unmask yourself, keep your mutes on, and then we'll take the mutes off right at the end and have a big round of applause.
All right, so everybody smile, 1, 2, 3, and I gotta do the next page. 1, 2, 3. And the last page. Ready? And 1, 2, 3. All right, there we go.
So big round of applause, taking mutes off.
Congratulations.
Work.
Bravo.
And special coronavirus graduates. Bless you all and good evening.
Congratulations,
Thanks, everybody. Fabulous work. Fabulous.
Thank you.
Great job, everybody.
Great
Yeah.
job.